you? Why don't you put Dave inside of your mouth? It starts out small, but he'll get real big and spurt out flavor. 'Cause it's Big Dave's chewing tobacco. Woo-hoo! So get some of Big Dave's juices in your mouth, you hear?
Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a treat.
Shh, it's about to start.
Warning, the following program contains scenes of death.
Round and round the gobbler's bench, the monkey chased the weasel. The monkey thought was all in fun. Pop goes the weasel, penny for a spool of thread, a penny for a needle. That's the way the money goes.
Since a serial killer has been in existence, even before they had a flashy name, there have been those eggheads who have debated on what constitutes, by definition, of what is pure evil. A soul that is so godless to not look back at their deeds with any remorse or regret. Hamilton Howard Albert Fish was born May 19, 1870. His father was 75 when Albert was born and died when the child was just 5. It was then that Albert and his siblings were put into an orphanage. Once in the orphanage, Albert was picked on and beaten mercilessly by the other children. But bizarrely enough, early on, he discovered that those beatings aroused him, and he'd get a boner and sometimes jizz his pants. Although suffering with mental illness and regular hallucinations, Albert's mother was eventually able to get a job, and when he was 9 years old, she took him and his siblings out of the orphanage. By all accounts, Fish liked the taste of cock and taking it up the ass early in life. And when he was only 11 years old, he started a homo relationship with a 17-year-old telegraph boy who worked downstairs from the family apartment. The telegraph boy would regularly piss and shit on young Albert, forcing him to eat his own excrement.
Isn't that adorable?
It was around this time that Fish fell out of a cherry tree, leaving him with a severe concussion and a pronounced stutter that seemed to alter his personality.
Cocksucker.
It was in 1890 that the Fish family relocated from Washington to New York, a city with a reputation to have more than one cocksucker, that's for sure. And I guess it was there that Fish decided to take his ball-licking expertise to a different level, becoming a rent boy, hanging around the streets, peddling his ass pussy. But it was also at this time he started molesting young boys under the age of 6, luring them into alleyways, fucking them, beating them, making them eat his shit. And at that time period, there were plenty of them, runaways, the unloved. But when Fish turned 18, his mother, fearing that he were becoming a pansy,
Bit late for that, honey.
she arranged for him to marry a 19-year-old family friend. Wow, teenage girls really did look different back then. And when I say different, I mean fucking ugly. Although now married, it was on a date with one of his homo lovers that Albert went to a waxworks exhibition and witnessed the dissection of a child killed in a road accident. And he came in his pants right on the spot, and it flicked a switch in Mr. Sticky Pants. But it weren't all cumsicles and good times for Mr. Fish. In 1903, he was arrested for forging checks and sent to Sing Sing prison. But even doing hard time seemed to get Fish hard. He was that much a miscreant. which is a surprise considering Sing Sing had a reputation for being the world's most brutal and unforgiving prison. But it also had a reputation for housing New York State's biggest freaks. It turned out to be the perfect fit for Fish, because they were his type of guys. Not only were it the prison that coined the term up the river and the big house, it also invented the term faggot, but it certainly weren't the Holiday Inn with only a bucket to piss and shit in. Each cell measured 7 feet deep and only 3.5 feet wide. But Fish still managed to bend over, and by all accounts, he was popular with the other inmates, and given the name Shitstick. Which I'm guessing, and of course I'm no expert, that's because whoever came across Fish put their dick in him and, they got a shitty dick, a stick. Shitstick. It's kinda catchy. And although by all accounts having a good time in prison, once out, his children claim his behavior became increasingly bizarre, and he would have conversations with imaginary friends, including the Apostle John.
Hi, how are ya?
With Fish's oldest son, Albert Jr., claiming that he once saw his father standing on a hill screaming, "I am Christ." It was at this point he believed he was being ordered by the Almighty to castrate little boys. The children also recall regularly seeing their father flatulate himself with a nail-studded paddle. It was in 1910 that Fish embarked on an affair with a retarded teenager. By Fish's own account, the 2-week relationship was based on unspeakable brutalities, with at one point Fish claiming he stuck his entire leg up the kid's ass.
That's fucking messy.
And when he got bored, he lured the retard to an abandoned house, tied him up, and cut off the kid's cock. Fish said, from all the screaming, he feared he were gonna get caught. So he poured disinfectant over the simpleton's wounds, put Vaseline on them, stuck $10 in his mouth, kissed the Mongo on his big forehead, then said goodbye.
Bye, Albert.
But I guess that was a step too far for his pretty wife, and she got up and left him for another man, but also left him with their 6 children. Speaking of which, in his own words, when he molested kids, he preferred them to be Negroes or retarded.
Or a winning combination of both.
Knowing that the cops wouldn't give a fuck. It's in around this time that Fish was regularly sticking pins into his cock and up his scrotum for sexual pleasure, and his children reported that he totally lost his grip on reality, regularly wrapping himself up in a carpet, ordering his kids to kick and beat him. But it was in 1919 that Fish upped his game and started murdering the young boys that he'd been molesting. There were now a kids' drought in New York City, but since it were ass pussy peddlers and runaways, the cops paid no never mind. It was also at this time that Fish experimented with cannibalism, eating raw meat but also feeding his children it, and the horny house painter was acquiring himself quite the little network, paying neighborhood kids to help him find his victims. It was in one incident he brought 2 young children up to his apartment, offering the hungry rapscallions nourishment. It was while he was in the kitchen making them food and they were in the bedroom wrestling on the bed. They rolled off, and under that bed they saw a bloodied hacksaw and a meat cleaver, what Fish referred to as his implements of hell, and the children fled. But Fish's modus operandi of abducting the unimportant and the unmissed failed when he unknowingly abducted the son of a Manhattan police officer. The 8-year-old was playing on the street with his 4 friends and was seen talking to what the friends described as a gray man, and he disappeared into thin air. As it was the son of a police officer, there was a massive search of the city and the surrounding areas, and the kid eventually turned up, hanging from a tree, naked below his waist, with the skin stripped off of one of his legs and strangled with his own suspenders, so tightly that it looked like the suspenders had become part of the kid's flesh. Cops figured they had a pansy madman on the loose and assigned 250 officers to the case, with the father of the child, Arthur McDonald, leading the search for the ass-pussy perpetrator. An autopsy showed that the kid had eaten raisins just before he'd expired, and that was most likely how he'd been lured away. But officers discounted that it was an old man who did the killing because of the brutality of the crime, and figured that the killer had to be a man in his prime, remarking that there was so much jizz in the kid said that you could have made a jizz milkshake. Although I don't know why anyone would want to do that. The city of New York was now in a state of terror, with every child muttering the words, "the gray man," and he was becoming a nighttime bogeyman. Parents were now warning their children, "Go to sleep, or the gray man will get you." And now, a couple of the clever investigators started to figure out that a lot of other kids had been going missing. And although several suspects were brought in, no one was found. And all the leads dried up, with the murdered child's mother making a plea to the city, "Please help us find the gray man." It was in the spring of 1928 that Ed Budd placed an ad in the paper looking for casual work. It was 3 days later, a gray-haired man knocked on the family door in Upper Manhattan and said his name was Mr. Howard, and he invited Edward and his friend to come work for him at his farm, and that the sweet-paying gig would be starting in a week. And then he pulled out a bag of money and placed it on the table, I guess for dramatic effect. It was while sitting at the dining room table with the family that the youngest daughter, Grace Budd, walked into the room. The pretty 8-year-old was dressed in her best Sunday dress, and Mr. Howard told the girl's family that she looked good enough to eat, and they all laughed uncomfortably. But I guess being he was an old man, they let it pass. He then told the family that he had to leave because he was due at a prior engagement at his niece's birthday party, but asked Grace if she'd like to attend, and that there'd be lots of good food, fun and games and presents for everyone. Grace's mother did not feel comfortable letting her daughter go off with a stranger, but the father overruled this and said it'd be good for her to get out. She'd been staying in too much lately. As then Grace grabbed her best Sunday hat and went out the door with the gray-haired stranger. And Mrs. Budd watched her daughter and the gray-haired man disappear down the street, and she was never seen again. New York City was now in a state of terror, with the girl's abduction being reported all over America and Canada. What made the case unique as the parents literally gave the abductor their child. When they told the police that it was a gray-haired man, they knew that it was the gray man who had their daughter. It was 6 years after the Budd family's dearest daughter had gone missing that Mrs. Budd received a handwritten letter.
I grabbed her and she said she would tell her mama. First I stripped her naked. How she did kick, bite, and scratch. I choked her to death, then cut her in small pieces so I could take my meat to my room, cook and eat it. How sweet and tender her little ass was roasted in the oven. It took me 9 days to eat her entire body.
The killer went on to say that he could have fucked the girl, but he didn't, so her family should be glad to know that she died a virgin. It was then that the police deduced that not only was the letter real, but that Grace Budd was dead. But they also had their first clue. Whoever sent the letter lived in East Harlem. But it wasn't the letter sent to the Budd family that would be Albert Fish's downfall. It was the envelope that it was sent in, because on the back of that envelope was the initials of a chauffeur hire company. When investigators contacted that company, they said that their stationery had been outdated, so they'd given it to their janitor. And when the cops contacted that janitor at his rooming house, he was as clean as a sole on a cripple's boot. But he told investigators that he had since moved from his previous rooming house. But while he'd been there, he'd given some of the envelopes to a gray-haired man, a man called Mr. Fish. When investigators got to that rooming house and spoke to the landlady, she said that Mr. Fish had moved on, but he occasionally returned to collect his mail. And although cops staked the place out for 3 months, there was no Mr. Fish. But it was on the 5th month that the landlady called the cops and said that Mr. Fish was there to collect his mail. And they told her to stall him. And when they arrived, there was an old man sitting on a bench, to which they inquired, "Mr. Fish? Mr. Albert Fish?" And he nodded and pulled out a switchblade from his coat. But they easily took down the geriatric tough guy. And looking down at the piece of shit child killer, The detectives laughed and said, "We got you now." And once in custody, he didn't even try to deny Grace Budd's murder. Instead, he told the investigators he'd gone to the apartment to kill her brother, but he'd been so besotted by the young girl, he took her instead and admitted while strangling her, he jizzed in his pants twice involuntarily.
I hate when that happens.
And he told the cops where they could find the rest of the brat. Well, parts he hadn't eaten. And they found a foot bone or two and a skull. Not much to hardly mention. But I guess it were good because it gave her parents a sense of closure and whatnot. What's the fucking deal with Grace's father's eye? That's weird. And in the end, prosecutors could only pin 3 murders on Fish, because that's all the proof they could find. But they figured there were many more, a fact he didn't deny. And his defense lawyers, well, they tried to say he was insane, and that was something that no one denied. But the jury, they still figured he had the chair coming to him. And I guess they were right. Her witnesses say that when the verdict was read out, that was the only time during the trial that they'd seen Albert Fish smile. And they even sent him back to Sing Sing, the place he'd originally had so much fun in,